Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode in our long running series of 52 must see movies and why they matter. And we are here with a rather peculiar entry on the list, probably one not a lot of people are familiar with. And right away, for those of you who don't know where we're getting all these movies from, it's from this book here that's put out by TCM, and it's written by Jeremy Arnold with a intro by the late great Robert Osborne, who was the longtime host at Turner Classic Movies, but has unfortunately passed away recently. So we are honoring him by going through all of these films, and we have hit one here that is interesting because it is not one, like I said, a lot of people are probably aware of. Before we get into it, I am back here once again with my good friend Stephen Billings. Stephen, how you doing?
What's up? Just continuing this series of great classic and contemporary films. Like you said, this is an interesting one. This is one I had not seen, and this was my first look at it. So let's talk about it.
Yeah, this is one that I had seen previously, but I don't think I've seen it in a couple of years. And at the time, I think it was just randomly on Netflix. And now it's actually kind of hard to track down. If you can't find it on DVD, you probably have to rent it through Amazon or whomever. But we are talking about The Lady Eve, which came out in 1941, starring Henry Fonda and Barbara Stanwyck, and is written and directed by Preston Sturges, who is someone who wrote a lot of films like this. A lot of romantic comedies with a lot of melodramatic moments in it, and a lot of heart to them, and it's very much par for who he was as a filmmaker and as a writer. I was discussing with Stephen beforehand that he is more known as a screenwriter than he is a film director, but he is obviously efficient in both. As someone saw fit to put this film on the 52 must-see movies list. And for those of you not familiar with this series we're doing, we will spoil the heck out of the plot. So just forewarning everybody that is what we are doing. But the plot itself is not extremely elaborate in any way. It's rather streamlined. The movie is only about 94 minutes, 93 minutes, around there. So it's a very tight film. And that's what I really liked about Preston Sturges' films, that they are all rather tight in that respect. Like I said, great screenwriter. So here we have someone who is portrayed by Henry Fonda. He is Charles Pike, I believe. I believe that is his name. And he is a rather naive, rather gullible man, an extremely nice man. And he has just spent, I believe, a year in the Amazon, I believe, on some type of safari or something like that. And he's also a big snake enthusiast. I believe he's like I can't remember the term, but he is someone who studies snakes. That's his passion. That's his scientific profession, not so much, but that's just what he does. But he's also part of this large brewery empire, and they create and they make manufacture very popular, very profitable ale, a pale ale, and apparently everybody loves it and everybody drinks it. So he is filthy rich. He comes from a wealthy family, and he is. And when we first meet him, he gets on this boat, and the people that are on this boat are Barbara Stanwyck and Charles Coburn, and they are accompanied by another man who was portrayed by Melville Cooper, and these are grifters. These are kind of con people. These are card sharks, if you will. They kind of dupe people into gambling and then take all their money. You know what I mean? That is what they do. So they mark him right away because he is a rich guy, like I said, and they want to get him and they want to get some money out of him. And the Barbara Stanwyck character is kind of the entry point into that. She is someone who romances whatever John, if you will, that they are looking for, and she lures them in, and then and then they take his money. And it's really interesting how he goes about it, how you don't believe he's aware of what's happening, but in fact he kind of really is aware of what's happening. He's almost going along for this con, if you will, because he is falling in love with the Barbara Stanwyck character who was called Jean in the film. She has a couple of names. She is the Lady Eve, but she's also Jean. But we'll get to the Lady Eve part later, which is like the second half of the movie. The first half of the movie is just them on this boat and having this romantic rendezvous, if you will, this romantic moments with one another, and it is really ballsy, I would say, for some of the things that Preston Sturges is doing in this movie when it comes to eroticism or sexual encounters, really kind of towing that fine line to what you can and cannot insinuate on screen at that time. Stephen, did you see that eroticism, or am I just dirty?
No, you're just dirty. No, I'm just kidding. No, yeah, definitely. I mean, in particular, the scene where she gets him back in her hotel room and and is just basically just leading him on, and making him go crazy, and then sends him to bed alone, on purpose.
Yeah, what is it with Barbara Stanwyck and seducing men for her own purposes? We saw this when we covered Double Indemnity, which she lured in a poor Fred McMurray's character to commit a crime. This is not a film noir, so it's not devious like that. But she is, playing almost the same type of character, but with with a heart, essentially. I mean, she's not a femme fatale. She has a heart.
No, but I mean, I think definitely, something that she does very well, and it's part of what makes this film, part of its importantness. It is, and if that's a word, importantness, but that, they're kind of taking the trope of a romantic comedy and making the female kind of the one that falls in love and then, has to deal with that, messing up her plans or messing up her father's plans, having to deal with the fact that she's fallen in love with their target, basically.
Yeah, essentially that's what happens is he is head over heels in love with her, and then she falls in love with him. I think partial to the fact that he's just an extremely nice and humble individual. Like, he's very wholesome. He's very affectionate. He's very he's not what a rich guy would typically be. Specifically in these movies, usually the rich guy is an arrogant jerk or something like that, and it's usually the poor person who has the heart of gold, is very humble and everything like that. But Henry Fonda's character acts like he's a poor person. He doesn't care about money. Money doesn't mean anything to him. He just cares about snakes and being left alone, if you will. And and she comes in and kind of seduces him in a way. And that ends up screwing with the plans of conning him, because she doesn't want to keep taking his money. She doesn't want to dupe him in any way. Unfortunately, Henry Fonda's character gets wind of who these people really are. There are great moments leading up to this revelation where they play cards, and you see kind of the back and forth between the James Coburn character and the Barbara Stanwyck character. They're almost having a battle of wills, where one wants to con him and the other one doesn't, and they almost have to kind of compromise, if you will, or one side ends up winning over the other. And it's very interesting how emotions change after this revelation. You know what I mean? You see how vulnerable and almost dangerous it is to be the Henry Fonda character, because once he finds out that this woman he loves is not who she is making it out for her to be, he's almost devastated emotionally. And it's a really great moment of the film where he's looking at this dossier, if you will, and then there's this nice dissolve at his shocked face. I thought that was a really nice technique of him reading what's on the page, saying, watch out for these people. They're grifters, they're con people, they're dangerous. They are professional gamblers, if you will. And then he has this confrontation with Jean, and it's a very emotional one for both of them. I mean, there's a lot of melodrama in that scene, You know, it and the way Preston Sturges shoots a lot of their moments together is they're in the same frame together. You know what I mean? It's basically just a two shot. There's no real coverage. It's just showing them being very close and very intimate. And you saw that earlier when they were being flirtatious and romantic. A lot of close, closeness between the two physically. You know, that's the way she was kind of able to get him. And now you see that again, but it's very emotionally distant. They're close, but now they're definitely worlds apart. I mean, it's. I feel almost bad for the guy because you know he was duped. He was duped by someone who he thought was something else. And but she also has those real feelings, and she's trying to explain to him that, you know, if I told you then, you know, it would have been bad. If I told you that, I was going to tell you. I mean, he wanted to marry her. That's how close that's how emotional he was invested in her. And Steven, I know you had a little bit of an issue with, I mean, it is Hollywood, it is the 40s. These people are going to fall in love in 20 minutes. I mean, that's kind of the problem.
Yeah, I mean, part of my, you know, some of my issue with this film, and yes, I realize it's a dated film a little bit, you know, for the time. And you know, the other thing I had to keep in mind was, you know, realizing that this film, you know, it's a screwball comedy. It's kind of a satire on the genre. So it's one of them things that's kind of making fun of itself. So you give it a little bit of slack, but other than that, you know, still, yeah, these characters basically fall in love in a very short amount of time. So it makes me hard to believe in, you know, believe into the story, you know, a little bit, but I got past it somewhat, you know,
yeah,
I got over it.
A lot of the physical comedy that's inherent in screwball comedy, I would say, comes more so in the second half of the movie than the first half. The second half of the movie, I would say, is actually a lot lighter than the first half. The first half, like I said, is very romantic and melodramatic, and we're just kind of starting to get to know who these characters are. But a lot of the comedy in the movie is within the dialogue. It's very dialogue-driven film. The screenplay is very thick with dialogue, and it's very, for a film that's like 95 minutes. There's a lot of talking, and a lot of stuff you have to kind of unravel when you're watching this movie. It's not just like physical comedy, which is in there. So we get to this moment where um, they're basically parting ways now, broken up, if you will, and what we thought was that her father, played by James Coburn, tore up this $32,000 check that he had won, kind of duping him when he wasn't supposed to. And what we learned to find out is that he just kind of wrinkled it up, but apparently if you iron it a few times, you can iron out all of the wrinkles, and I assume they end up using that check. They never really talk about it afterwards. We're just kind of under the assumption that they end up using that check and basically stealing $32,000 from him, which is very interesting that that amount of money didn't mean anything to him. Like when he was signing it, he was like, "Oh, I'm glad we're doing this now, so I didn't have to give you a large amount of money." You know what I mean? It's really kind of quirky humor like that. And the next scene we see them in is they're at this racetrack, and they run into another con man, and that con man is connected to the Henry Fonda character, and that's where we have kind of a reunion in the second half where now Jean decides to portray herself as the Lady Eve, the niece of this grifter guy who's actually pretending to be some type of lord from England and whatnot. And that is when the film shifts to be more of a comedy, because the Henry Fonda character is a bit of a klutz, apparently. You know what I mean? I mean, he's falling over couches. He's getting like chicken dumped on him. He's like, you know, doing stuff like that. And there's a great line where like he's at the end of he had to change several times throughout this lavish dinner party that they're having, of which the Lady Eve character is just commanding the room. You know what I mean? Like everybody loves her. Barbara Stanwyck is great in this movie as this grifter woman.
And also she proves that there is a worse disguise, worse than Clark Kent with the glasses, that somehow works.
I
and
mean, it's
fresh.
really we're stretching reality. It's a comedy, and you almost have to forgive it for all of its zaniness
Yeah,
because it's very zany.
all she does is put up her hair, and that's it.
Well, she puts up her hair, she changes her accent, maybe she carries herself different. You know what I mean? But the guy who is um Charles's kind of overseer or his bodyguard or whatever, Murgatroyd, which is just a great name. He's suspicious of this the whole time. He's like, that's the same woman. That's the same
He's
woman
the
from
one.
before.
He's not in the comedy. He's like some dude that like fell into this weird, quirky movie, and
He's like,
he's the real logical person in the movie.
yeah, but what's crazy about him is the way the actor is playing him feels like an over the top like 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 a James Cagney character from like the 30s. You know what I mean? That's the like he has the accent, he has the demeanor of a James Cagney. It's almost as if it's like a satirical version of a James Cagney character. It's really kind of funny, and he's older, and he's just puzzled by this whole situation. Like, that's the same woman. He's trying to investigate and figure it out, and it's like, us at home, we know that's the same woman. You know what I mean? We know that is Jean, but he's trying to figure out, and he just can't quite like prove it in any way. That leads to a lot of other comedy. That leads to a lot of comedy with his character as well, where he's like going around with the servant's tray, and like I said, he dumps like the whole tray of chicken on top of Henry Fonda, and what I was getting back to is Henry Fonda gets to his third suit of the night, and he's like, "Yeah, this is if this one goes bad, I'm gonna be wearing a bathrobe. I've got nothing left." And what kills me is that like that suit is an all white suit. And I'm like, oh man, something bad could. If for all the suits you could have left, an all white suit is probably the worst for the situation you've been in on tonight. And a special shout out to who plays um, Charles's father in the film, Eugene Pallett, who
God.
is an underrated kind of character actor in the film, a character actor in his career where he just kind of shows up in these movies playing this just loudmouthed father figures, patriarch. He showed up in My Man Godfrey, kind of playing the same character, and he showed up in this film here. And he's just loudmouth, and he's like just hilariously over the top sometimes. I mean, when we first meet him, he's pissed off because all the servants and everybody's getting ready for this party, and he wants his breakfast. So he just starts ringing his bell and bashing like pots and pans together, and just to get his stuff. And then it's kind of it's really over the top zaniness, but the film, you know, like keeps it all together. You know, like I said, everything moves along. There is some montage stuff, and what ends up happening is Charles is under the impression that this Lady Eve is somehow related to the other woman in some way, and that's why they look the same. It's really just a crazy over the top premise, where this the other guy who's pretending to be her uncle says like like it's like she's related to the other woman somehow. It's really over the top. You have to watch this movie. It's a tight 95 minutes, and it's a lot of fun. And what ends up happening is they end up getting married for real in this montage sequence. And I'm like, and at one point, the James Coburn character and the other character says, "Can this be legal?" And the guy's like, "Oh, I guess so." And it's like, sure, why not? But her whole plan this whole time was to have Charles re-fall in love with her, get married for real, and then basically uh, get him to divorce her so that she can basically take half his money. It's a scam. It's a big long con scam that she's going for, and there's a really funny sequence on the train after the marriage where she's just going through all of these different men that she's been with and how they're all interconnected. Like, oh yeah, that guy was that guy's friend and that guy was that guy's cousin. It's like, oh, this and that. And then like his reactions are just hilarious where he's like, what are you saying? And and then and then she ends up having a rather quick kind of change of heart where I almost don't. I think she feels bad. Steven, did you get any of that? Like, because after that sequence, we go very quickly to almost the summation of the movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it almost makes you question whether she was ever going to actually, go through with the whole thing in the first place. Maybe in her mind she thought she wanted to get like a revenge on him. She wasn't done with him and needed to, and she wasn't getting rid of her father, so she just kind of strung him along with this plan, and then at the last minute decided, or finally gave into what she really wanted to do, which was get back with him.
Yeah, I think this whole time she, despite what she said, where after their initial breakup, if you will, that she hated him, but a lot of that hate, I think, was kind of false. Like she was putting up
Well, I think it was
an emotional front. You know
think
what I mean?
I think it was more she hated herself for not telling him about it sooner.
Yeah,
I think
she loved him throughout the whole movie, and he her. You know what I mean? That's obvious. But I think she, like you were saying, I don't think that revenge was as genuine as we are led to believe, because the change of heart at the end of the movie is so quick, where where they're going through this whole, like, over the phone, where she'll give up everything if she just meets him. I think that what her plan was, that she wanted to then reveal that it's me, it's been me all the time. The Lady Eve is Jean, and vice versa. We're the same person, but he doesn't go for that. He's really emotionally, like, hurt by this, that she has to figure out another way to get with him. And that is when we get to the end of the movie, where he goes on a boat and then she shows up back as the Jean character, with James Coburn portraying her father, and the character Gerald, who's there as well. And we get this lovely rendezvous, if you will, where he's happy again. You know what I mean? Like, because that Lady Eve character was so awful to him in his mind, that Jean is almost better by default, if you will. And we get a lovely moment where they get together, and that's essentially the end of the movie. And it's interesting that this movie is on this list. You know what I mean? It's not a bad movie at all. If anything, it's a good movie. It's great screenplay, wonderful character portrayals, and everything. I just don't think that it is the best Preston Sturges movie that you could possibly put on this list. I was telling Steven earlier, my favorite Preston Sturges movie is Sullivan's Travels, with Joel McCrea and Veronica Lake. I think that movie came out the same year as this one, and I thought that movie has a lot more depth to it, and it also has a great screenplay, great performances, and is a romance similar to this one, a romantic comedy, a screwball, a little bit, if you will. And I'm surprised that one is not on this list, but The Lady Eve is still a good movie.
Well, yeah, it's definitely it was it's a solid movie. It's not one of my favorites on here. If you're talking about making a list of 52 movies and you want to put a little bit of everything, I feel like we already got our really good screwball comedy, which was It Happened One Night.
Yes.
And I feel like, maybe we could have gotten into some other territories instead of putting this type of movie on here. But, not our list. We're just
we're just looking at them. We're just looking at them and talking about them. But yeah, I highly recommend people checking out Preston Sturges's filmography. Like I said earlier, he has more screenplays than directorial moments in his career. But yeah, if you like this movie, check out Palm Beach Story, check out Sullivan's Travels. Definitely watch this movie. There are several books that have his screenplays, like all compilated in them, so you can buy those. I think there may be out of print. I'm not quite sure, but like I was telling Steven, a lot of people learn about Preston Sturges in film schools. He's taught a lot when it comes to screenwriting classes. He's taught a lot when it comes to a lot of comedians are heavily influenced by his work. I know Bill Hader is definitely influenced by him. The a comedian who was on SNL, and he's a huge cinephile. He's actually on one of the special features for the Palm Beach story, where he talks about Preston Sturges and why he loves him so much. He actually has those books I was just referring to. So it's very interesting how influential Preston Sturges is. And I will definitely say, no one quite at that time was really writing romantic comedies that were so good and so tight and everything, and were so heavily dialogued, heavily dialogued influence, if you will. Yeah, written. Heavily dialogue written, and really smart dialogue too. Smart, fun, witty dialogue in these movies. So yeah, this has been our look at The Lady Eve, without delving into it even more, because it is a rather tight film, like I said. Steven, any last words, and where can people find you on this thing we call the internet?
Yes, I guess obviously I didn't hate this movie. It's just not one of my favorites in the sense of this list. I just don't know how I feel about it in that sense. But I do think it's a solid movie, and I agree with what Andrew's saying about how it's a very tight movie. It's very differently written than compared to a lot of the other films of that time, which makes it have some importance. So if that's what they were going for, then sure. But yeah, if you can find me on all the social medias, Stephen Billings on Facebook, Movie Man for Life on Instagram, Twitter, and whatnot.
Yes, and you can find me on Twitter at Capzilla06, as well as my YouTube channel, Capzilla Productions. And we are here on our friend Dan Skip Allen's YouTube channel, doing all of these 52 must-see movies and why they matter. And we will eventually get to that magic number 52 at some point.
Hashtag get to 52.
Yeah, hashtag get to 52. Yeah, so check out all the content that's here, as well as content from me and Steven. And until next time, keep watching those movies, because I know I will.